Tonight I'm very happy to introduce Hirsch Perlman. Hirsch's photography and his film works address issues of art making and art practice. He's been widely exhibited, his work has been widely exhibited, including solo shows at the Drammens Museum in Norway, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and at the Renaissance Society in Chicago. He's also active as a writer, and his writings have appeared in Art Journal, ArtUS, and Art Muscle. I'm very pleased to say that since last year he's been an associate professor of art at UCLA, and in May he will be showing some older work at the Blumenthal Gallery here in Los Angeles. So without further ado, here's Hirsch Perlman.
Pleased to be here because a slightly more formal slide lecture is a very different kind of opportunity than the classroom or the gallery or the studio. And I think some of you guys already know that for the past few years I've often begun my slide lectures with a few words about being an artist and a teacher in what I consider conservative, and I'm sure most of the rest of you agree, deeply cynical times. Tonight I want to start with readdressing something I wrote in 2002 where I said that the answers to the world's problems are in cartoons. However, since then I've been thinking I was dead wrong and that cartoons might just do us in. From the cartoons published first in Danish newspaper causing riots that killed nearly 150 people worldwide, to claims that SpongeBob SquarePants will influence your kid's sexual orientation, to the International Holocaust Cartoon Competition recently sponsored by an Iranian newspaper, to Moonanite from Aqua Teen Hunger Force, flipping off and shutting down Boston just a couple of weeks ago. Cartoons are really pissing people off. If you didn't see this, I'm sure a lot of you saw this, but if you didn't see this, these were essentially homemade, old-school light-bright toys that were promotional devices for the Aqua Teen Hunger Force movie coming out next month. Here are two Moonanites at home in the cartoon with Shake, one of the main characters on Aqua Teen Hunger Force. Moonanites, as you can see, essentially just stepped out of an 80s-style computer game. They have two expressions: fearful eyebrows and angry eyebrows. Here are the three main characters of Aqua Teen Hunger Force. Shake's housemates are a meatball named Meatwad and a carton of fries named Frylock. Yeah, so now, of the 10 cities in which they were distributed, Boston was the only one that mobilized and treated the peg-like boards as possible bombs. Boston's bomb squad even detonated some. All of which pretty much brought the city to a standstill, even though the light brights had already been up for more than a week. Turner Broadcasting quickly apologized and even agreed to reimburse the city of Boston for $2 million. $1 million of which is supposedly goodwill funds dedicated to general improvements of Boston's emergency services. Who knows, maybe including Cartoon Orientation Day. The two men who were hired to distribute the light boards, while being characterized as artists and as performance artists, particularly by their lawyer, held a press conference in which they would only take questions about hairstyles, cutting off reporters with, "That's not a hair question, next question." And if you watch the press conference on YouTube, you see how stymied, bewildered, and insulted the members of the press are. Finally, someone asks the guy with the dreadlocks if he thinks he might have to get his hair cut if he ends up in prison. He says, "Excellent question," and then he goes on to think about it out loud for way too long. All in all, he thinks his hair is, quote, "kind of perfect right now." All right, here's an online poll about where to lay blame. By a huge margin, more than 10 to 1, people responded that the authorities overreacted. Of course, that's from the subcategory of people who take online polls. About 1% of the respondents blamed the artists because, quote, "they should have realized the reaction that something like this would cause." All right, but one of the most peculiar reactions is that despite those poll numbers, in a move indicating that there's more accountability in cartoons than in government, the head of Cartoon Network, Jim Samples, resigned, saying that, quote, "It's my hope that my decision allows us to put this chapter behind us and get back to our mission of delivering unrivaled, original animated entertainment for consumers of all ages." Hear, hear. Seriously, how can we take responsibility for a wrong war if we can't take responsibility for our cartoons? Another cartoon battle with reality could be said to be taking place in the career change of Richard A. Clarke, the former counterterrorism czar who was very critical of the Bush administration's counterterrorism efforts and the decision to go to war in Iraq. So after having worked in intelligence and counterterrorism under 4 administrations since 1973, Clarke has, in the past couple of years, written 2 novels about terrorism in the future. It's probably not entirely fair to call it a career change. He's chairman of something called safeharbor.com, a website that tracks and discusses security risks around the world. They have not responded to my application to join their discussion groups and bulletin boards yet, because I'm some sort of security risk. On the cover of his first novel, on the left, and in the afterword of the recent novel, as well as in a special video introduction on Amazon, Clarke says that sometimes you can tell more truth through fiction. That's not at all a new thought, but it's always interesting to consider what that means, not to mention that it sounds so good, so promising. Telling some sort of truth through fiction is an aspiration many artists share with writers, right? Truth through fiction would alleviate the pitiful fear that ultimately we do little more than express our privilege in being artists. And while there's no doubt Clarke is for real, and he's really trying to raise people's consciousness, his novels, though enjoyable and sobering, are very cartoony. But then, not as cartoony as this, the graphic adaptation of the 9/11 report. Another truth via fiction interface, the 9/11 report as graphic novel. I'm sure I'm not the only one here who read this version cover to cover and maybe only skimmed the text-only version, right? Anyways, for these guys, one a longtime comic book editor and the other a longtime comic book artist, it wasn't a strategic overhaul of how to get the word out, like Clarke's novels, as much as a new playground. Though it's interesting to see how symmetrical the claims made for Clarke's novels and the illustrated 9/11 report are. Whoops. Hang on. Yeah, on the back cover, Stan Lee, the co-creator of nothing less than Captain America, Spider-Man, and the X-Men, to name a few, says that the graphic adaptation of the 9/11 report, quote, will set the standard for all future works of contemporary history, graphic or otherwise, and should be required reading in every home, school, and library. I don't know about the idea of required reading in libraries. I've never heard of that. And despite many, many disappointing, patronizing panels, like the one in the middle of this selection of Richard Clarke, why shouldn't the graphic adaptation of the 9/11 report be required reading? Even the 9/11 Commission's original report issued a somewhat cartoony follow-up in the dismal report card it gave the President and Congress for the lack of progress made towards the Commission's recommendations. I mean, whenever I see this, I have visions of the President and Congress going home with this, safety pin to their jackets. It's hard not to want to draw a frowning face in the margin, or a Moonanite with angry eyebrows. At any rate, truth through fiction is a particularly timely consideration. First, because it's really just plain weird how some of these sort of cartoon skirmishes with reality are such a tender spot, like the riots sparked by the cartoons in the Danish paper, or Moonanite in Boston, while other cartoon reality concoctions lay claim to truth, like Clarke's novels and the graphic 9/11 report. And more importantly, finding truth through fiction is a timely concern because that very phrase sounds like an Orwellian slogan that might aptly describe the modus operandi of the current administration. They deliver their truth through fiction. So the artistic aspiration of revealing some sort of truth through fiction, whatever form that might take, ought to be proportional to the government's ultra-cynical version. When the government itself seems like an all-too-real cartoon, then other cartoons matter. When I'm particularly pessimistic, I think of art as the delusional patient who, although in the hospital, is certain he is actually at home, and while getting into the elevator says to the doctor, "You wouldn't believe how much we paid to have that put in." Still, I'd say that I have to say that I aspire to a humanist worldview that's not so far from that, where what counts in interpretation isn't so much whether or not we found similar significance or similar truths. What counts more is the diversity of delusions. The important thing right now is to add another possibility. All right, here I'll get off my soapbox and we'll start looking at artwork. If there is some sort of truth in art fictions, I think it shows up first in the relationship itself between the work and the viewer. Partly true, partly imaginary, part real, part artifice. I like the game of asking what sort of answers artworks are to any number of questions one might put to an artwork about how it is a definition, a description of its relationship with you, the viewer. Actors are good foils for playing that game. Between 1994 and 1995, I made a series of works where actors performed ambiguous scripts that I wrote. This image is a spread from a book called Stills from a Complete Conversation. They're video grabs from a piece called Complete Conversation. Complete Conversation was a 2-channel video installation with a monitor at either end of the room, 2 photos opposite each other, so that when you walked into this room, you were essentially walking into the middle of the 2 actors' conversation. This is another spread from the book. The caption is the same, though, as the caption in the photos in the installations. It reads, you can probably read that, but you indulge my conceit by saying only what you think I want to hear in order to encourage me to do the same for you. That's pretty much what their instructions were. Here's a short clip.
The way you carry on.
Yeah, I know. I can't help myself.
This is perfect.
Could it be just this easy?
Let's say it isn't.
I couldn't care less.
And if it is, what's worst that could happen anyway? What more can we ask for?
Yeah, we gotta leave well enough alone.
That, my friend, goes without saying.
This has got to be more than they bargained
Oh,
for.
forget them already. They're like an open book.
They're in a world of their own.
I think we should just quit while we're ahead.
Then just watch and wait.
The script obviously is made up entirely of cliches and hackneyed phrases. What you can't really tell from that clip, their conversation actually goes on for, I think it's close to 20 minutes, and the script itself is actually looped. So at one point in the conversation, they just trade parts, and could go on like that indefinitely, just trading parts back and forth. Another script from that same body of work was performed by 3 different pairs of actors. I'll show you short clips of 2 of these pairs. This script also revolved around shifts of power and absurd displays of male ego. In a brochure the museum published with the work, I asked the actors to answer a question. I asked them, who did you think you were in your performance? And probably the simplest, most fitting answer was one of the actors in this first excerpt that I'll show you. And he simply said, I was myself living truthfully under imaginary human circumstances.
If I think you can take care of this, I've got another thing coming.
Yeah, if you think I can take care of this, you do have another thing coming.
Can't help me with this.
I can't.
No, I can't help me with this.
I can't help
just
you with this.
Painted myself in a corner.
Damn it, don't you see you just painted yourself in a
I have painted myself in a corner! I have!
Don't you hear what I'm saying?
Do I know what you mean?
Do you know what I mean?
Oh, for whatever it's worth, I think you've got your head in the clouds.
It's written all over me.
I'm sorry, but it's written all over you. You can ask anyone.
And you don't know whether I'm coming or going.
For the life of me, I don't know whether you're coming or
I just
going.
don't think I get the picture.
No, you don't get the picture.
You're not trying to put something over on me.
Hey, I'm not trying to put something over on you.
Can't help me with
I
this.
just can't help you with this.
If I think you can take care of this, I got another thing coming.
So they go on that way actually for something like 10 minutes. I won't, there's one other pair of actors that do this, and it's a little bit more like a who's on first routine with those two. This is an installation shot of Acute Conversations number 1 through 3. The captions to each of these photos say, "This is for your own good." This was one room of 3 in the projects exhibition I did at MoMA in 1996. The previous piece, Complete Conversation, was in the room next to this one. And the third room in this installation was a piece called A Nearly Perfect Conversation. So this couple carries on a short Alice in Wonderland kind of conversation, beginning with the man asking a woman a nonsensical question, something my dad used to ask me as a kid, as a non sequitur. He'd say, "Do you walk to school or carry your lunch?" So I wrote a script of trying to make some kind of sense out of that. I can't say that I exactly succeeded, but we're not going to watch that. She takes the question seriously and tries to answer. I wouldn't want you to think that we've left cartoons completely behind. These actors are the real-life husband and wife team that are the voices of Mickey and Minnie Mouse for Disney. They're the only two that read this script for me that came even close to pulling anything out of it. It's this little clue that of his profession embroidered on his shirt there in the corner. The first time I worked with actors was in 1989 for a piece titled Exhibit P, hearing number 1, transcripts 22, 14, 6, 10, 23, 13, and 28. Exhibit P consisted of 1 table, 7 chairs, 7,200 pages of documents, and 14 cassette tapes. So the 7,200 pages begin as 4 equal stacks of 1,800 pages each. Each of the 4 stacks consisted of the court transcripts of 7 different unrelated trials that varied in subject matter. Some were criminal, some were civil. But the pages were shuffled so that from one page to the next, it would be an entirely different trial and an entirely different place in the trial. And each page was coded or scripted so that there were basically 4 roles, the witness, defense, prosecution, and the court. So what I did is I took this master script after I'd shuffled all these transcripts together and copied that master script so that there were 4 equal scripts of the same 1,800 pages in the same random order. And then all day on Saturdays when the work was first performed, different groups of 4 actors would come to the gallery and read aloud from the stacks, each one reading a part. One would read the part of the witness, 1 defense, 1 prosecution, and 1 the court. They'd read through the page-to-page and trial-to-trial transitions, regardless of whether or not a page began or ended in the middle of a sentence, and regardless of who they found out they were in that page. Like, for instance, the actor who would be playing the witness on one page, would be a police officer, and then maybe halfway down the next page they wouldn't realize till halfway down the next page that they might be a 12-year-old kid. And they'd read all day whether or not anyone was in the gallery, and upon finishing a page, each actor placed it in the growing pile of paper covering the table. This is just a quick shot of, I was lucky enough to do a strange version of this in Warsaw, where, needless to say, I had a Kafka-esque experience just collecting Polish court transcripts to mix up with the American transcripts. In Poland at the time, the only thing transcribed in the Polish courts was what the witness said, not even the questions. And what the witness said was always written out by hand. So these were bilingual actors making the best of it. And this is what the official version looked like once they'd read through the entire scripts, and you have the sea of paper on the table. From that same body of work was an installation titled Exhibits A through E. The monitor shows 6 actors giving depositions, except that their script is made up of excerpts from Gertrude Stein's book, How to Write. Here's a short clip of one of the 6 actors. Whoops, that's not a short clip of one of the 6 actors.
They're sticklers for right and justice. They're without price. They produce in great abundance. They have no sorrow because they're noisy, having with difficulty understood that they were to be known at that time for just what they were. They were very well pleased with their coming in. That is meant an elaboration because, rightly or wrongly, they would never be called that now. Not when without, should, and in preference, which may care to be carried. Challenging that is a credit to them. That is a sentence that meets with opposition because they were in the past supposed not to have this aptitude. They were manageable.
There's a lot of difficulty getting those actors to memorize those texts. This was a larger body of work, all of which used law as a kind of foil for another sort of grand contest of meaning that's not so different from art. Ultimately, I think the law and art both hinge on interpretation and persuasion to sort out big things like veracity and values and affect. The 2 pieces with the actors, I think, got at the heart of the matter. I was particularly interested in pushing the performance of the real court transcripts towards nonsense and pushing the performance of the Gertrude Stein excerpts towards something almost documentary, and that maybe they blur somewhere in the middle. After the body of work devoted to the law, I was feeling that the relationship between the artwork and the viewer is more manipulative, filled with more collusion, not that civil. So for a couple of years between 1992 and 94, I wrote a manual on how to conduct interrogations. I wrote it with the attitude that for one reason or another, anyone might want to conduct an interrogation and that anyone might be a potential subject for interrogation. So I tried to be very comprehensive, including sections on things like planning, picking a topic, picking a source, desired qualities of the interrogator. This is just a partial list of the interrogation techniques I included. Some are borrowed from books on interview techniques, mostly. There was only one old Army field manual that I could find, although I think online you can actually download a recent interrogation manual that the Army uses now, supposedly. Borrowed techniques from movies, TV, and many of them were made up. That's a terrible scan, but the manual took different forms. First couple of drafts were made up of about 40-some 20 by 24-inch drawings with text in big vinyl print protectors, just spread out randomly on a big 4-foot by 10-foot table. I'll read you just a couple of examples of the 40-some drawings. This says, establish your identity technique. You start by insisting that the source is not the person they pretend to be, and in the process of trying to persuade you of their identity, the source supplies you with information. This approach needn't be as aggressive or as literal as it sounds. If you know the source, you could begin by recalling some occasion when he or she didn't seem to be their usual self. This says, nonsense technique. This technique consists of asking the source questions that literally make no sense, either by their improper grammar, incorrect syntax, or their illogical content. This can become so nerve-wracking that it will be a great relief to answer questions that can be understood. This technique can also be useful when you don't have any particular objective. So lots of it is that ridiculous, and lots of it is a lot more sober. And I never really decided if the writer is someone who's writing this as a fantasy of control and sort of a self-help manual, or if it was written by someone who's already going through all their day-to-day conversations as though they were interrogations. Either way, it's a pretty cynical description of everyday conversation. Here's another installation of another part of the interrogation manual. These parts were more directly like teaching tools, and certainly me inching closer to conducting some sort of interrogation. These were all from the appendix to the second draft of the Layman's Guide to Interrogation Techniques and Practices, and included examples of body language and gestures. The video at the end of the room, which also we'll skip a clip of, but essentially what's going on there is that there's an actor just sitting at a table. You occasionally see me pacing around him, and I read from the manual one sentence at a time, and his instructions are to repeat back to me verbatim what I just said. And every time he gets it wrong, or stumbles, or forgets what I said, or even gets a word wrong, I read it again until he gets it right. And that takes about an hour. And he's pretty frustrated. This is the opposite wall from the previous images. These were visual descriptions of types of behavior of the interrogator using an empty chair as a subject. Not long after thinking about interrogation a lot, I made this piece. It's called Shoving. Caption on the photo reads, "Two people taking turns shoving each other over and over again as deliberately and as forcefully as they can." Here's a short clip. That also goes on for about 12 minutes or so. They're exhausted and drenched in sweat. They happen to be brothers. And I have to stop. I also like the read that I've heard on occasion since I've made that piece, where people have asked me if I meant to be representing red states versus blue states. I like that read, but the piece actually was made before that became so ubiquitous in language. This piece is called Conversation. It's a slightly less aggressive version of the same thing. The bar underneath the photo is, this was just an installation that was in Germany. So the bar underneath the photo is just a German translation of the caption, silkscreened onto the wall. The caption reads, "Two people each using only 10 different sentences, carrying on a potentially endless conversation until they reach an impasse." So that's pretty much what they're doing. They each have their scripts in front of them. They each have 10 different sentences on their scripts. And I wrote 20 sentences. I tried to write 20 sentences in such a way that either one of their sentences could be used in response to any one of the other one's sentences. And their instructions were to simply carry on a conversation for as long as they could. using the sentences in any order they wanted, repeating them. Changing pronouns was fine, that didn't matter to me. This is called 28 expressions. And when I get through this piece, it'll describe, I think, a little bit better what I was interested in the last few works made after the interrogation manual. The 28 expressions is made up of 16 video stills from another piece from 1993 called Expressions. Expressions is a 30-minute video that accompanies this photo. The caption says, "A man making these expressions, worry, resignation, bemusement, fatigue, anger, and relief, one after another, as completely as he can, and beginning and ending each expression with a blank stare." This is an installation shot of 28 expressions and of the video piece Expressions. So what I liked about these, what I was interested in with these works and the conversation piece and even the shoving piece was that despite the fact that the caption in the photo would pretty much tell you exactly what the game was, whether it was shoving or conversing or making one of 6 expressions, the viewer invariably goes somewhere else with it, or is, let's say in the conversation piece, is taken in at some point and begins to believe that they're actually talking about something. And inevitably one of them would deliver a line in such a way as to throw you out of that and remind you of the game they're playing. And I've always liked that kind of tug of war between the viewer and the work. So the photos and captions of 28 expressions is me just trying to decipher what the actor had done within the range of the 6 expressions named. 16 photos that I could narrow down to 28 possible expressions. And these are, of course, all fictions. The actor's directions were to make those expressions in any order, and I just made my best guess later. These, on the other hand, are science. I'm going to take a slight detour before going to more recent work into what some of the limits of depicting emotion and or depicting acting might be. These pictures are from Darwin's book, The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals, published in 1872. They're from the chapter titled Surprise, Astonishment, Fear, Horror. On the left is a photograph by the French physiologist Benjamin Duchenne, who published 84 pictures of electrically induced expression in his book, The Mechanism of Human Facial Expression, published just 10 years before Darwin's book. On the right is an engraving made from another Duchenne photo. The entire reason for the engraving is to remove the hands and electrodes of the, quote, operator. Those are the instructions Darwin gave to the engraver, sort of Photoshop before its time. Both of these images were in Darwin's book, so he wasn't trying to hide how these expressions were produced. The two pictures together try to ask what the difference is between an expression and an electrically induced expression. After all, Darwin was trying to study expression, not electrically induced expression. And though we're supposed to be reassured that Duchenne's subjects were voluntary and suffered only minor discomfort, in the same chapter, Darwin writes, quote, "Almost everyone would experience the same feeling in the highest degree in witnessing a man being tortured or going to be tortured. In these cases, there is no danger to ourselves, but from the power of the imagination and of sympathy, we put ourselves in the position of the sufferer and feel something akin to fear." All right, Darwin is of course talking about real life, but the images in his book tell a cautionary tale. As a reader, our relationship to the engraving, without the electrodes, spares us the something akin to fear we might feel looking at the pictures with the electrodes. Or, to say it another way, the poor man in the engraving without the electrodes is genuinely reacting, without prodding, to what's in fact being done to him in the other 80-some pictures Duchenne made. That is, within the universe of Darwin's book, the reproductions put the poor man in the position of the actual sufferer and the imaginative, sympathetic suffering sufferer to his own suffering. And honestly, I haven't figured out how to describe this exactly, but truth, fiction, and cartoons seem already very entangled here. Of course, you've got to be wondering why the electrodes at all. Because exposure times in the 1860s were still too slow to freeze a true moment. They were too slow to capture someone's spontaneous and genuine expression. Someone had to hold the expression. And if it wasn't electrodes, then it would have to be acting. In fact, of the many photographers Darwin contracted to make pictures, the one who made the largest contribution to Darwin's book ended up acting out the expressions himself. These pictures show acting at least as much as, if not more than, expression. Still, Darwin's book is one of the first books to utilize photographic evidence in the service of science, despite what, by today's standards of evidence, we could only consider imprecise or even melodramatic, not out and out utterly subjective. And of course, it's our current weaponry that can, and I'm certain has, produced volumes upon volumes of pictures of expressions of absolutely genuine terror. We've all seen the bomb cam view. But some vault at the Pentagon stores the shots where the bomb cam sees buildings and people, where we see people looking up, people who see the missile coming. We see them see the bomb that a millisecond later kills them. And I imagine that it would take the macabre images in that vault to break through this video game distance. Of course, none of this could have happened if we hadn't long since shortened exposure times exponentially. Computer circuits are photo images in a sense, and owe much to photo technologies. 52 years ago, Harold Edgerton made this picture of a nuclear detonation just milliseconds after the detonation. That's the same Harold Edgerton who made this less frightening but equally profound, otherwise invisible moment visible. A number of years ago, I think late 80s, Jennifer Blandy made a beautiful porcelain sculpture honoring this instant. The less famous Edgerton photo, maybe less profound, picture of a bullet going through a banana. But the detonation pictures are very scary in a if I'm seeing this, it's way too late sort of way. Though there's also a peculiar reassurance in knowing that we can't ever actually see anything in milliseconds. These pictures represent a limit, just to the other side of the horrible reality of the bomb cam movies. Funny also, these tests all had these very strange, well, maybe not strange, because they all had these completely innocuous names. Like this was called Harry. Oops, I guess I skipped over one of Edgerton's photos. That's okay though. A long unplanned process led me to make my own facsimiles of Edgerton's photos of nuclear detonations. And I'm going to try to show you how I got there, but I'm not completely sure I ever answer why exactly. In fact, I think my proximity here is very close to something I try to steer students to be very skeptical of. That is, aestheticizing something horrible, reducing complicated, forever nuanced reality to abstracted formalities. I like to think my detonations are just too ridiculous, though, to carry that burden, since they're all made from beach balls and Christmas lights. I called the series Operation Idiocracy. But I have to go backwards a little bit further to annotate how I really got there. I had been making work like this. Between 1998 and 2001, I sequestered myself in a room with cardboard figures. And I'll take you through an abbreviated version of these pictures, about a quarter of them, I think, while reading my notes from the time, notes that were embellished and fictionalized near the end of the project by my partner Aaron Cosgrove, after breaking her promise not to ever go into the room and then actually absconding with my notes and replacing them with some of the following. Yeah, these images are just a side note. They're a lot more contrasty on the projection, but they are pinhole photos, so it's not as though you're missing a whole lot of detail. All right, day one. I made figure one in my likeness, starting with a large FedEx box torso and a small and a mail tube neck. A grocery bag stuffed with trash and newspaper constitutes the head. Duct tape joints. Suddenly, my garbage seems full of promise. Day 6. Figure 1 reclines on the carpet with all the self-satisfaction of a Roman emperor waiting to be fed. I begin the creation of figure 2. In 2 hours, the population of the room has doubled. 2 figures now, and I don't know what to do first. It's as though we're all drunk. Day 7. Awoke this morning in a state of agitation. Dressing quickly, I run to the room. They'd spent the remainder of day 6 getting acquainted, sprawled out on the floor like stoned adolescents. At first, I thought the two might become friends, or something more. I now know they can be nothing of the kind. Adding a second figure has turned them both into misanthropes. Day 11. Figure 2 has developed an adorable shyness around me I can't yet account for. While he mugs for the camera, I get the feeling he's holding something back. His duct-taped Gioconda smile is at one moment provocative and the next infuriating. I marvel at his perfection. Day 16. Hastily, I construct 4 more figures. A gang emerges. They're not doing nice things to each other. Still, I couldn't be happier. Day 18. I've spoken to X about my new project. I tried to be cool, downplay its import. X showed interest, said she wants to see my figures. What does she want? Why must she pry? I told her it isn't time yet, already knowing that X would never see the room. Too much in jeopardy. No one will. Day 40. 40 days I've kept in the room. I must reconnoiter. Retreat to the dark room, head filled with doubt. Did I project non-existent meaning on their paper-bound hides? The photos say otherwise. Every image I pull from the chemicals is a dripping tribute to our entanglement. Day 63. We are at work again. They posing, me arranging. The truth is close. Hardly a moment to write these words. I spend every waking hour amongst my crude corrugated clan. X would have me temper my time in the room, suggesting I might split it with non-room related activities. She thinks I'd come off less possessed that way. She acts like I'm a businessman who should keep business hours, as if there's no consequences, as if the very nature of making meaning weren't at stake. I must follow this body of work down the ever-darkening path it forges. Don't just execute those ideas that remain compelling, utterly obliterate them. Day 65, a very active day today. We work from daybreak to well past happy hour. First, reenacting a rodeo, then a stock market crash, then an Olympic downhill, and last, their favorite, 120 days of Sodom. We are rewriting history, trying to get it right. Day 68, my brain is rattling. Everyone seems sort of delirious. X phoned, wondering why I've missed 2 of our meetings. I need to protect this work from prying eyes. I know how humans are. They ruin everything. I've devised a plan. I'll take everybody apart. With those parts, plus all the material that has continued to accumulate, I'll build one very large head. They'll be safe in my head. This idea produces momentum and motivation. Day 80. I indulged my tears as I converted my figures into the giant heap that would feed the head. Did figure 2's smile seem more mercurial? Did figure 1's noble brow wonder at my judgment? And what was the meaning of figure 5's final gesture? I'll never know. They're the head's secrets now. The head cannibalizes everything and is still demanding more. Day 81. The head is grand, massive. Had it a body, it would stand 75 feet tall. Each handsome bulbous eye is 4 feet in diameter. Sometimes I imagine the giant head rolling through Los Angeles, crushing all in its wake. My head gets dizzy thinking about it. Day 90. Now X thinks the head is symbolic of one of my heads, whatever that means. I know what must become of the head. There is only one way to save it from X and other giant head belittlers. I need to put the head, all 14 feet of it, in a vice. Yes, the head will be smashed, but on my terms. Day 98. I no longer recognize X. Her features wander like lost sheep. I suggested that maybe we could continue if she'd agreed to put a box over her head, or at least a bag. I knew just the box for her. Cubicle, with large red letters on a bright yellow ground. Day 113. I scare myself a bit each day, and at night, thoughts of my head run through my head. My head is all I think of now. Day 149. X looked at my photos, speechless of course. Later she emailed me a list of disorders she believes I exhibit. Androidism, arousal from robots with human features. Macrophilia, attraction to giants or giant creatures. Nebulophilia, arousal from fog. Teratophilia, arousal from deformed or monstrous people. Icolagnia, arousal from contact with sculptures or pictures. Pantophilia, arousal from just about everything imaginable. Day 167. The vice is ready. Faced with the head's demise, I've never felt so alone. It seems we have nothing to say to each other. Still, I'm reluctant to crush him. So, back to reality. These were always hung in salon style in no particular order. And the parts of the project that I've exhibited ended around day 176. But I did, nonetheless, go on to improve the design and effectiveness of the vice. It continued to get much more robust. So then I ended up with this machine that produced these very dense, heavy, torso-like packages. And like the figures and the head itself, the vice starts to take on a life of its own. Enough so that I eventually clean up the room around it. It was clear I needed to get out more. So, in the fall of 2002, I began to spend time on the roof of the building I lived in, with no particular objective. That time inevitably drifted into the evening. I liked being up there. It was a relief from the room. And as corny as it is, I began to feel as though I was keeping some sort of vigil. So I spent a lot of time reading it. And this is the winter of 2003, while the drumbeat to war in Iraq is getting steadily louder and seeming more inevitable. These are all 6x7 format, long exposures, 10 minutes, sometimes longer. Something Herbert Mouchamp wrote in the New York Times around that time felt close. It's a mysterious idea at the end of a short piece suggesting that it may be time to return to considering rebuilding the Twin Towers. He says at the bottom there, the reduction to essentials is a great New York tradition, evident in our engineering and in our art. It is the correct tradition to invoke here, and then to ensure its revival, I would propose a school, a center of unlearning as well as learning, a place for disembedding ourselves from the welter of fantasies that has enveloped the country in recent years. I love the idea of a school for unlearning, and I'd have to say that my perch on the roof felt something like a kind of private version of that before I could have named it that. And I started drawing into the long exposures I was making initially by accident when the apparatus I used to hold my reading lamp simply came loose and made that simple arc. So I started drawing more deliberately. Yeah, this idea of a school for unlearning also resonated, of course, in being a teacher. It's still true for me that since 9/11, being an artist and teaching art seems simultaneously more and less relevant than ever. I know I'm not the only artist who feels that way. I think that's the chord that Mouchamp's School for Unlearning hit. And at this stage on the roof, I think I'm just trying to make an opening, as though drawing blindly might be a way to see something other than the inevitable. And there was drawing on different scales. These are lines simply from a helicopter that was circling me one evening, which leads inevitably to me drawing rockets just beyond my reading station. I'd make simple jigs that would help me make the different shapes with all vast collection of flashlights and light sources that I collected. Probably a little contrasty in the projection, but you can see the duration of the exposure in the star trails was still another larger scale of drawing happening in these photos. And I started concocting more visitors, slightly more articulated. It was always hard for me to say whether they were coming or going. Sometimes confronting, or just staring. Whatever the case, if I was in the frame at all, I was always unaware. Then I started concentrating on just the rockets. They were all titled, you might be able to read that in the corner, but they were all titled with a kind of Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote Latin, Apparatum Armorum Ineptum, which essentially, it's real Latin. I have no idea if it actually means what I'm about to say, but I decided that it meant something like inept war machinery. Closer view, trying to make out some of the jigs that would help me make the different shapes. I think you can make out a little bit. In the actual prints, you can generally make out some of the parts. So up to this point, I hadn't decided if my rockets represented fight or flight. There was a war about to be waged, but the moon kept turning up in enough of my shots that I was wanting to investigate that further. I particularly liked the way it would measure the exposure. And although I think a trip to the moon on one of my rockets is still brewing, in the winter of 2003 I had to picture explosions. Early on in this process, they look more like some blob thing from Planet X. Some of them you can, this one you can just make out downtown LA in the right background. These, like the detonations after Edgerton that I'm leading back up to, they're also made from beach balls and Christmas lights. And just as I'm hitting my stride, I think, in being able to produce the effects I want, and control the lighting, control the inflation of the beach ball, getting the exposure right. My landlord sees me lurking up there, and needless to say, isn't happy about my nighttime studio on the roof. So I had to take Operation Idiocracy into the studio. The numbers refer to the roll number. The number after the R is the roll number and the frame number on that roll. In the actual pictures, they're it's handwritten. This is just for your benefit in the presentation. But supposedly, the point is that supposedly as the numbers increase, I make a more persuasive explosion. Which brings us back to the ghost detonations after Edgerton. This is half of an installation of all the explosions. So the other two walls that are behind us are also double hung with about the same amount of photos. Same thing here. This is also about half of all the other photos in another room, hung very tightly, trying to avoid sort of fetishy photo installation by packing it like this. And I like the idea that packing it like this encourages some kind of semblance of a story. This is just a slightly different installation where I mixed up the explosions with the rest of the pictures. And starting to finish up here, but don't want to leave you with the impression that all my work is quite that dark. This is a clip. I'll show you a short clip of a couple of, 2 of 6 animations I've made in the last 6 or so years.
On this heart of mine, I keep my eyes wide open all the time. I keep the ends out for the tide that binds. Because you're mine, I walk the line. I find it very, very easy to be true. I find myself alone when each day's through. Yes, I'll admit that I'm a fool for you. Because you're mine, I walk the line.
How do you like
on for the duration of that song, which is about 9 minutes, and gets slowly a little more complicated, a little more insane. All right, and I don't want to leave Darwin entirely behind. The engraving on the left is also in the expression of the emotions in man and animals. It's described as, quote, a cat in an affectionate state of mind. On the right is a painting by Louis Wain. I'm sure some of you know of some of his work, known as The Man Who Drew Cats. Honestly, which cat would you rather pet? It's interesting because Wain was born just a few years after Darwin's book was published. Which brings me to the last things I'll show you, some of the simplest and probably most rewarding work I've made. These are pictures of cats and dogs, all for a small commission at a children's hospital north of New York. This is Trigger. This is Furpo. This is Lucky. And I'm trying to picture cats and dogs that share a more meditative perspective than conventional cat and dog photography. Trying to concoct a kind of companion that might, obviously assuage some of the fear and anxiety that a child would feel being admitted to the hospital. This is Plato. This is Yao. This is Blackjack. The hospital has hung these pictures around the admitting area, and their instructions are to ask each child if they want one or if they have a favorite, and then the hospital's supposed to make a print for the patient to take back with them to their room. This is Casper. And I'll end with just the thought of what a relief these pictures were to make. Their objectives were so clear. The relationship between the patient and the picture, the work and the viewer, is simply to be hopeful and humble. Maybe just a sort of restful influence. Thank you. Hopefully time for questions.
We do have some time for questions. There's a few mics that we can come down the aisles with if anyone feels like they need a mic to project their voices to Hirsch. Just let us know.
Hirsch, it seems like there's a kind of change when you move to California in your work, and you end up photographing animals. Can you talk maybe a little bit about you did a lot of work in Chicago, and then you moved out here. Do you think there's any? I don't want to talk about the difference in the art scene.
Yeah. Well, actually, the first work I made here was work with actors. So it's a little more seamless than it would seem, maybe. Because I was doing some of the work with actors in Chicago, and then the very first pieces I did here were some of the later ones with actors. The only difference being that I got some actors that are, like barely recognizable, which was kind of deliberate. I didn't want actors who were household names, not that I could get them, but I wanted actors that actually you'd say, you might think to yourself, I've seen that guy somewhere before. But I know that's not really answering your larger question. I think there's clearly, to me, a big change in my work when I started doing the pinhole photos of the cardboard characters and the head. And I can't really attribute that to anything particular about California, but I can say that I knew at the time, I was very aware at the time of wanting to change my practice, or wanting to change my relationship to my practice, change how I was in the studio. You know, mostly in a simple way of waking up that day and not knowing exactly what I was going to do, and letting that take as much time as it needed to. And in a, you know, also in a way that's maybe not obvious, that wasn't so far from some of the work I was doing with actors, because in a lot of that work, I was consciously giving up a lot of control. Like a lot of the work with actors, you know, sometimes I was directing them, but a lot of times I wasn't. I just wanted to see what would happen, and a lot of times their acting isn't really that good in the pieces, but some of those places interested me as much as the places where their acting was better. So there was this idea of sort of giving, you know, I think I was on my way to giving up a certain amount of control, in a sense. I don't know if that, I mean, that sort of is a partial answer. I don't know how else I could trace.
It's just a springboard. Kind of.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody else want to throw a California, you know, how the work's all about California now. I'm from here now. Yeah.
I noticed in some of the earlier work, especially the trial transcript pieces, that the chairs seemed really particular. They looked like they were fashioned out of MDF or something. They didn't seem like your standard chair that you would buy. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the different sensibility in your work then, where you seem a little more interested in the artifacts from the process of making it, like showing the furniture as sculptures, and this later work, and I don't know, maybe you do show some of those rocket pieces, or you show the actual devices used to draw the rockets.
Yeah, no, just the pictures in that work, yeah. But
talk about why, maybe? How you arrive at that decision?
Well, I mean, I'll back up just a little bit. The furniture and the law-related work. I mean, that was a much larger body of work than what I showed, but everything was made out of, it was MDF, and I liked the idea of the chair or the table looking like a model of itself, in a sense. You know, I needed actual furniture for the actors and the rest of the installation, but I didn't want it to be just, you know, I wanted to separate some kind of distance to the whole thing, you know, including when the actors were sitting there. So I liked just how it sort of all the furniture sort of looked almost like cardboard. But the answer to like showing, I mean, any of the work that I did with the cardboard stuff in the room or the stuff on top of the roof, I wouldn't show any of those artifacts because none of it's interesting enough, actually, as just stuff. It's only interesting to me in the distance, you know, added to it through the picture, and in the cardboard stuff, especially that they're pinhole pictures. Like even if those, I would never have used, and I did actually document everything in that room in every format that I had available to myself at the time. I had a video camera in the corner of the room shooting time lapse of the whole 180 days. I'd go in, I'd shoot 4x5, I'd shoot 35 millimeter, I'd shoot medium format. So I have all this material, but the only material that I thought was interesting was the pinhole material, because of that kind of, you know, just a little bit of distance that it gave you from exactly what you were looking at. In the pinhole pictures, you know you're looking at cardboard, but it's a lot less interesting if you see all the details and all that extra information about the cardboard and the duct tape and what color it is. That just didn't matter. And the same thing with the stuff on the roof. There's just, like, I was interested in giving away as much of the process as I could in the pictures, so that's why those pictures are 6x7 format. So in the photos, there's enough detail to make out you know, all these silly things I've got around me, and sandbags, and the jigs I built, and a fog machine that's almost always in the shot. But I'm only interested in it being there as pieces of helping you put the story together of you know, whatever you're going to concoct out of my process. The stuff itself is just not that interesting. That sort of answer that question?
Yeah, it does. So I was thinking about, or just what, yeah, I was just thinking about like Roman Signer's practice. I don't think he ever shows he shows the objects from his performances or his actions, but he never shows them together. So I was just interested in.
Oh, you mean he never shows the stuff and the pictures in the same?
I don't think so.
Well, it's interesting because if I wonder, I mean, I'd imagine. I wonder if it's, you know, for similar reasons. You know, where, I mean, it's funny because it's making me think there's something of almost the opposite going on in some of the work with the actors and the photographs, where that's exactly what I'm interested in doing, is like telling you exactly what it is the actors are doing, so that, and then despite the fact that you've been told, you're going to concoct that they're doing something else, or in the expressions piece that, you know, I've heard people name, oh, well, he's making such and such an expression, which isn't an expression that's on the list in the photo right next to them. And I don't see that as a mistake as much as I think that's, you know, I get a kick out of that. I think there's a funny way in which the viewer wants to be conned, and then hopefully later enjoys the fact that they've been conned. Yeah. Do you have a question? Yeah. Just a little bit, but not nearly as much as I did in the room. Yeah, hardly at all.
I was wondering, because you have a lot of stuff about 9/11, and I was wondering if you're interested in that as in like the shift in American culture, or if it's really in the greater global issues. Because there's a lot of reference in that way. I was just curious.
I'm not sure if I'd make that much of a separation. I mean, I don't claim that any of those concerns like directly show up in the work. I mean, in some of the work they do. I don't know, actually. I don't tell you the truth. I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, I think it's definitely had an effect on you know, on culture at large, for sure, and the effect it's had on artists. I think it's still too early to say even. You know, you know, to be frank about it, I mean, I think a lot of times it's still, dealing with it still kind of falls in, for the most part, still falls into, you know, the camp of like artwork that's, you know, really explicitly political, and trying to deal with it in a way that's, you know, practically, you know, bludgeoning you, which to me is a less interesting relationship between the work and the viewer. If I'm, you know, being told what to think, basically, and then I either agree or disagree with it, and then that's the end of the relationship in a way. So I think it's like, I think about it a lot, but mostly my thinking about it ends up coming out in, you know, in these funny connections about like just like being stymied watching the news talk about, you know, these light bright things of Moonanite that, you know, had already been up around Boston and 10 other cities for more than a week, and then all of a sudden they decide, oh my God, these might be bombs. I mean, it's just insane. That's a really sketchy answer to your question, but it's a tough one. Yeah.
In your rooftop series, you're shown as reading, sitting down and reading.
Yeah.
Was that? I mean, it makes me think of like sort of a blending of like narrator and reader, and
yeah,
and then how that, you know, I mean, you know, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. I mean, you're still there even when you're not there. It becomes even more present. In a
yeah,
sense.
absolutely. I mean, I love all those kind of games of, you know, of shifting around like what the allegory is there. Maybe, I mean, you know, there's the relationship of me to showing you this picture of me reading, sort of half there, but yeah, that is in some way an echo of what it is you're doing as a viewer in relationship to the photo. And then, you know, I like the idea of complicating it with concocting these figures that, you know, are maybe, you know, seem to be aware of me, but I'm not aware of them. And, you know, how much are they just actually, you know, foils for me? I like to set as much of that in motion as possible. I don't think there's a particular, you know, I don't think there's any one particular line of thought there, though, that I'm after as much as, you know, trying to stir up a bunch of different variations on that relationship, and hopefully not mystifying it too, though. I mean, that's why I like, you know, I put a value on on the photos, trying to give away how they were made, but not by some, you know, not by being in your face about it, but just that's another story in the photos that, you know, if you look through enough of them, you're going to kind of piece together exactly what I was doing there. And they're pretty choreographed, actually. And they're much more choreographed than they look, because even the ones where I'm partially there reading, I mean, despite how much time I spent up there just sitting reading, when I'm making the pictures, I'm actually like running around, you know, making this shape and then making this shape, and then hopefully sitting back down in the chair with the book long enough to burn the film a little bit. So that whole process is a little more insane than actually shows up in the photo.
We have time for one more question, Hirsch.
All right. Yeah, I was sure you were going to ask me what I was reading up there.
What were you reading, by the way?
You know, I was thinking about that earlier today, and because I was anticipating, I think that, you know, somebody's going to ask me that, and I don't remember actually.
War and Peace, probably.
Yeah.
The 9/11 cartoon.
Yeah, there was what? Yeah, Michael.
What do you feel about the idea that teaching of art and the idea of critiques and discussions seems only fruitful in the setting of around school or educational settings? It seems somewhat degraded once it's out in the market or something.
Yeah.
In the gallery. Or
You mean the discussion seems
right,
degraded?
Critique.
Yeah.
That if talking about art can only exist inside school.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know that you know that's something. You know, that's a subject close to me. You know, it's forever a strange thing to me that those are unbelievably unique situations in school, because that's not something that ever happens again, where you sit around in a room with a bunch of people devoted to doing nothing else but looking at your work and hashing out what it's about. To me, anyway, it's way more abstract, that conversation after school. But which isn't to say it's not there. I think it just trickles down a lot more slowly. And you know, if we have any effect actually on, you know, as artists outside, you know, once you're out of school, it's just very slow and abstract. I don't think you ever get to. I generally don't feel like you ever get to actually see what that effect is, as much as that as much as a value is put on that at school to, you know, crank up, you know, witnessing what kind of meaning your work is making. And I'm fairly cynical about it. I mean, that's I'd have to be frank about that. But you know, it's almost as though behind your question, though, is you wonder if there's some way to continue that out of school. Yeah, I mean, you know, I think artists are really underutilized resources, and in just a bazillion different ways. And you know, I include myself in this, but I also can't believe how little artists, you know, you guys, you know, like in you know, majoring in art in undergraduate school or going on to graduate school, like how little we use the web as a way to try to, you know, further or spark some kind of larger discussions. I mean, that's just an example, but it's, you know, I agonize over all that too. I think that's a tough thing. Also not a very satisfying answer, probably just more of like slugging it out. Anybody else?
I'm curious because it seems like there's kind of a brewing tension in the relationship to the process,
Mm-hmm.
and then finally arriving to the animals, it seemed like kind of a sigh, like a relief, you know, like wow, you know, you kind of still lose yourself in.
Uh-huh.
I'm just curious your relationship to that.
Well, what you just said is exactly. I mean, those pictures were exactly that for me. They were a huge relief. Like I was really taken with the idea of just, you know, making some work that you know, I mean, I don't actually know how how it's going at the hospital, or what, you know, I'd like to get. I should get in touch and find out, like, sort of how that's working out. But basically, just as an aspiration, just a sort of simple idea of trying to make work that had, you know, that had a fairly humble aspiration to just, you know, be a kind of calming companion. And like there was somewhere earlier in the talk at the beginning, I mean, it's a game I play. I constantly play with my own work, and, you know, every student, you know, all you guys who are here that I've talked to you about your work know that I can't not play this game of trying to describe what sort of relationship your work is setting up with me as a viewer. And so that work was also a kind of great relief in how direct and how simple and you know, clear it was. That just, you know, making artwork that was just a kind of, you know, friendly pet. That work would have, I mean, your part of your question, I know, was about process. It's funny because that just thinking, that work just, that wouldn't have worked very well if I included all the, like in all the work previous to that, especially the photo work, I put this value on kind of including a lot of the process and a lot of how I got somewhere, and you know, trying to watch myself doing whatever it is I'm doing in as many ways as possible. The cat and dog pictures would have just not worked at all, trying to add all of that crap. All right, thanks you guys.